Okay, good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. Thanks for joining. This is Anthony Adorno with DeGarmo. Just letting you know you're all in the right place. We'll be starting in just about 1 minute, so please sit tight, and we'll be ready to start soon. Okay, I've got top of the hour, so we're going to begin on time. We try to do that every time. So I want to welcome everyone today. I know that there are many people still in the process of joining, so they may miss my little introduction to the session, but that's just fine. I think the most important information will come from our speakers momentarily. So again, welcome. My name is Anthony Adorno, Director of Consulting Services here at DeGarmo, and I'll be functioning as the moderator for today's conversation. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to join us in the past, the Talent Leader Forum that you're attending today is a bi-monthly peer-to-peer event. Our goal is to partner with industry thought leaders and provide access to expertise. So we're looking for tips, strategies, best practices on a variety of different topics, many of which you all suggest as part of the survey process that follows this session. And most importantly, we want this to be a time and cost-effective experience for everybody. So with that said, we're gonna learn a lot about the use of donation authorization data as part of talent management practices today from some industry thought leaders. And as part of this experience, we've gotten some feedback in the past that we need to leave a little bit more time for Q&A at the end. We usually leave about 10 minutes. We're going to try to leave about 15 minutes of time. And so throughout today's session, please use the Q&A dialog box to ask any questions that you'd like us to present to our speakers during that time. So at any point during the conversation, if something comes to mind, if you have a question, just go ahead and type it in, and then we will try to get to all of them, time permitting, at the end. So to just level set, why we're here and what we're going to talk about today. In our experience, historically, many OPOs have been hesitant to use authorization data as part of their talent management practices. And that may be due to a number of different reasons. It may be privacy-related issues. Maybe there's concerns over the potential for bias in the use of that data. Maybe some of your coordinators are working in more challenging hospital environments than others are. Maybe some of these OPOs don't feel like authorization data provides a complete picture of performance, or maybe there's just data reliability issues. So needless to say, a lot of organizations have been reluctant to adopt the use of this data historically. But on the other hand, some organizations have been very intentional and proactive about using this data in ways to try to advance their practices. And so this has been a topic that has been requested several times in the past as part of that survey. And so we're fortunate to be joined by two thought leaders who themselves are at very different points of the data utilization continuum and who are willing to share their thoughts and experiences with our audience today. So I'd like to welcome Stephanie Davis, Chief Operating Officer at LifeSource in Minnesota, and Justin Johnson, Executive Vice President and COO of Donor Network West. So welcome to you both. And I thought that it might be a good idea for us to start by just getting a brief understanding of where each of your organizations are today, high level, with on this topic, on the use of donation authorization data with respect to talent management. So Steph, if we can start with you, I think that would be great. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me today. At LifeSource, we kind of have a tale of two cities. So in our tissue business, we use performance data to support our teams to do better in their roles, and have really sort of grown that over the last couple of years. Now, on the organ side of things, we're really sort of in that infancy stage. Data sharing personally is not something that we do necessarily. They have data, they can look at it, but really we look at data more in a group than we do individually for performance.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. and Justin, I know that you guys have been actively using auth data for a while. Can you kind of describe where you guys are today?
Yeah, definitely. From a high level, we're at a point where we're utilizing authorization data really to drive our operations. So incorporating that into machine learning, and utilizing some tools, working with our teams in order to bridge that so that it's visible and they understand what potential approaches they thrive in. So we have some modeling, some tools to use for placement of our staff. That's been very helpful.
Wow. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So I think from a cadence perspective, one thing that would make some sense for the audience is to maybe start with Steph, you and I having a conversation, because you guys are kind of at that point where you're considering the adopting of the use of this data. And I think there's a lot of people on the call today who are in that exact position. And so maybe let's start with some of the things that you're weighing as you make, the decision to use it or not as part of your practice. So, what are, from your perspective, are there, particular organizational priorities or goals that are influencing your decision to adopt or not to adopt the use of this kind of data going forward?
When I think about that question, I really think about it in terms of what externally do we have for pressures and what internally do we have for pressures. I think we all know we have that increased pressure of CMS and the tiering system, whether we're certified or not, depending on how we function within our organizations and also across the nation. AOPO has their big audacious goal of 50,000 lives saved by 2026. While that doesn't really affect us probably every day, it still looms there because we're all a part of that number, and we definitely want to hit that by 2026. And then I think just that general harsh opposition that we get from, the political nature of everything that we're seeing lately, where they're saying, hey, you're not saving enough lives, and yet year over year over year for the last several years, we've shown complete growth year over year. So I think from an external perspective, those are the things we think about, or I think about. And then really internal to our organization is we all want to be cared. And for LifeSource, that means we need to be greater than 305 donors in order to get us there. So we really have been focusing on what we're calling operational excellence, creating a quality management system so that our teams can better understand how strategy is linked to the work that they do. And we're just really started that over this last year. And really, I can only speak for the last year because I've been at LifeSource just not quite a year and a half. So those are the things that at least I am seeing. For our authorization team, truthfully, we're focused on non-FPA authorization. We know that that has historically been low, and we do believe that that's the game changer for us. If we can get those non-FPA authorizations to yes more often, we're going to be more successful as an organization. And our goal this year was 40%, and we're still hovering just about 33. But I think there's that internal pressure, especially within the team. They know if they don't get to yes, we don't get to donation. And I think that always looms pretty large and right in front of them all the time. And so I think all of those things help us to realize, how do we help our teams to get better in the work that they do? And if we're not out there and specific about how they're performing, they'll never know if they're the one that needs to maybe shift or change, or we have to support them better to do their job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, when you kind of started, you mentioned CMS, and we just heard Justin kind of talk about, you know, data modeling and using a deployment tool, like really digging deep in the analytics and being, you know, very intentional and strategic about how they're using that data. From your perspective, are there other external factors that you know, that are shaping your views on data authorization use of, you know, peer OPOs or other industry trends?
Yeah, you know, I've had the pleasure of talking to many COOs in different organizations. And I would tell you, I can't say all, but most of those that are performing in tier one already are using data to help really support performance within their teams. So when you see that kind of success, you're like, what can we do differently within our own teams to help them feel better about the work that they're doing? We're seeing just those simple expectations. So as an example, if you say authorization at 50%, at least the team knows what they need to strive for in order to meet some metrics. And you can really use that data to say, hey, if everybody's at 50%, that's going to be another 50 more donors per year, which will get us to tier one. And you can kind of take that modeling and help the team understand the impact of all of these yeses and how it functions within that goal. I think the bigger piece to it, though, is our teams need to feel like they're being supported in the work that they're doing. And so while you can have a goal, you have to normalize the goal in there every day so that they don't think it's a punitive goal or going to be the only thing that we look at when we look at their performance.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I think having a goal to strive for is something that can become motivational for people. If they know where they're at now and where they need to get to, then they have something to focus on and you know, in an effort to move the needle or to make changes to get there. You know, at the same time, that, you know, could cause a little bit of stress and you know, and kind of feeling like they're maybe being more closely evaluated or differently evaluated than they have in the past, and that may cause some discomfort. So, you know, when you think about, you know, potentially using, you know, this data going forward, how do you think your staff might react to you know, to implementing, you know, those types of practices? And if you've had conversations with them, you know, what steps are you taking to kind of mitigate those concerns that they might have?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. I think our teams, I mean, everybody, there's those early adopters who are going to look at this as, wow, this is a great challenge. I'm going to make sure that I hit this goal each and every time that I'm out talking with families. You're going to have those who are like, oh, okay, this is a good thing to strive for. And then you're going to have those who are like, this is punitive, it's not fair. So you're going to have that gamut of response. And so I don't worry about that so much, because when I think about utilizing authorization data, I think of it more as a trigger. It's not telling us that they're a poor performer, but it might tell us that they're struggling. And it really should just be a trigger for leaders to say, okay, let's look a little bit deeper into their story. So if your overall performance is 35% and 50% is your goal, looking into their data a little bit more to see what's going on. Hey, you're lower on non-FPAs than you are on FPA. You're lower on people when you're talking to them on the phone versus in person. So just taking their data a little bit to sort of look at their story really helps us to understand where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for my teams, when we introduce this, I want to be really clear. This isn't about good, bad, or otherwise. This is about helping them to get to where we need to be operationally excellent. And so with that comes a plan of action to help support them to be better. So if I think about it, one poor data month does not a trend make, right? And so when you look at data, you can't just look at 1 month and say, ooh, Steph Davis didn't perform very well this month. There must be something wrong with what she's doing. I really look at it more like this continual improvement. So if you're 3 months in a row and you're below 50%, we're going to look at your data a little bit more, kind of see what's happening, see if we can't maybe identify our root cause, and then get our leaders in there to shadow that person and give them real-time feedback. I think sometimes it might just be a little something that they need to tweak. Maybe they're not following the process exactly as we would like them to. But then those that are struggling even more, we want to really put them through a re-education. So let's give them a quick re-education of how we are expecting them to do this. Having just dialogue about what worries them, how do they think they're performing, and what are they identifying as things that maybe they don't do so well that we can give them more tips and tricks around. I don't ever want it to be punitive, but I do know that no matter what happens, they have to put the effort in to get better. And for some, that will be easy and they'll really want to do that. And for others, they may struggle with that a little bit, especially if they've been here a long time and they've been performing just fine all along. And then now we're telling them, but you're not at 50%. So let's figure out how we can support you a little better. It's just really trying to figure out what the secret sauce is, because I don't think we're going to make everybody happy. In fact, I know that's true. But I think if we continuously tell them we're supporting them, celebrate the little things with them, of course, also give them some hope that what they're doing is showing in their numbers, but also how we keep showing and connecting what they do every day to the strategy of the organization and to getting us to tier 1, I think that will speak volumes to our teams to really kind of build this village that we're trying to get so that everything works not perfectly, but better toward getting us to tier 1.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of things in there that resonate with me, and you're kind of talking about people's willingness to be open to this kind of feedback and how tenure may play a role in that. And we've had the opportunity to engage in some coaching with with coordinators and different OPOs, and some of the challenges do relate to tenure, where they've been in a job for a long period of time and they feel like they know how to do that job as well as they can, but their authorization data may not, may just tell a different story. And unfortunately, sometimes they're a little bit less receptive to that, that feedback that might help change their approach, their style to manage conversations differently. And so, I think maybe sharing this data in a responsible way, and that was kind of the other point that you mentioned is, rather than looking at a 1 month snapshot, looking at 3 months at a time. And it's one of my favorite quotes is, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so, understanding how to use data responsibly in order to, help guide the expectations of their performance and what may be an anomaly and what may not be, I think is really important. And so speaking of that, that brings us to how we can use data strategically and intentionally to try to advance our respective practices. And Justin, you've had an opportunity to learn a lot, I think, over time about what to do, what not to do in this area. And so I'd like to kind of shift the conversation to you for a little while, and let's talk about data use. And when you were talking about the deployment tool, but I want to start just a little bit earlier than that. So when we talk about your OPO's approach to using authorization data, how has that evolved over time, and what maybe prompted the shift in how you've decided to leverage it, ultimately getting to your tool?
No, yeah, great question. I think for us at DN West, even prior to me being in this seat, the organization has been innovative and utilized technology in some shape or form in order to do some type of matching or to put their best foot forward to for families. And with getting here, one of the things we've discussed as far as meeting the tier requirements is increasing our number of approaches. Because we could look at and see year after year how well we were doing with non-FPA approaches and authorization. So we approached this approach rate and saying that we need to hit 15% of our referrals we need to be approaching for donation, if you will. And from that, and looking at the approach percentage and increasing that percentage, we had to really take a step back and look at how people are performing and looking at specific data points in those areas. Because again, as you charge your family care team to get in front of more families, that's when the concern comes about suitability. Are we chasing numbers? Then if they're getting more no's, just how is that impacting them? And so as we look through the data, also talking with our staff, we were able to come up with data points to really look at and see what environments do they thrive in? Which hospitals do they thrive in? What type of families, race, religion? And so that's how our deployment tool came about, to look at, and it gives a score based on the metrics of the referral to place the appropriate FRC to be in front of that family. And so being transparent about what that looks like, because you're going to have family care staff that have concerns about some of those type of things. But over time, some of them have really adjusted and adapted, knowing that these are the type of referrals and approaches that they're going out on are those that they are better paired with or more comfortable with. And again, we're never meeting someone at the best time in their life. So we have to know that that is a stressor, and tough as it is for people to meet people where they are. So it's for us, this has allowed us to reinsure the staff and help them to be in environments that they thrive in.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the message is that you're setting them up for success and maximizing the likelihood that they'll have an opportunity to save or extend the life of somebody else, through that strategy.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the concerns that a lot of people have when we kind of talk about really having this data-driven decision-making, using an algorithm or AI at some point in the future to kind of manage the family conversation, or pairing the coordinators with different families, is that there's just this emphasis on kind of maximizing authorization rates. And I think philosophically that's great. We want to save as many lives as possible, but at the same time, some of the concerns that we hear are, how you balance, increasing donation authorization rates and also providing exceptional family support. So how do you guys manage that complex issue?
Absolutely. So it's a balancing act. So balancing, really charging the team with empowering families to say yes, but also the give in saying we want to either pair you on a team approach, or kind of have someone that can follow that family and provide great family support. Because what we're seeing as we're asking FRCs to get in front of more families, they're authorizing this family and then they're on to the next. And it's like, who's supporting that family through this process? And that's a hard thing for those FRCs that are making connections with these families to then leave and go to the next case. And so we've been intentional about building, and it's kind of in its infancy stage, a family support role, but also right now utilizing resources we have right now to put in place to support those families after authorization. And so that's what's met our FRC team where they are to say, okay, it's not just about getting numbers. So it's just that balancing act of how do you connect with the team that you want connecting at the hearts of people every single day. You got to connect with them and get into their heart and their soul. And that's how we figured out what makes them tick. And they want their families supported. They don't want to just authorize and leave and go to the next one. So trying to have that balancing act of how we have resources in place that we're working on right now actively to have family support in a different avenue.
Man, just out of curiosity, is there any like longer term plan in place to use the same kind of model to deploy folks to provide family support that there are for managing the donor conversations? Or is that?
Yeah, no, right now we're looking at just from the family support standpoint, what we're looking at is that role that we're sourcing to hire people is those skill sets that someone comes in with that knows how to support a family, right? Or support someone through grief. But our focus for approaches will stay in, with the deployment, but we don't currently. Doesn't mean that could change in the future. After we see how it works, yes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would imagine that kind of rolling out that kind of process, introducing that technology to the team, hasn't always gone smoothly. I've met, that's a major change initiative. It's a culture shift, and so I'm sure that there's been some challenges that you guys have probably encountered along the way, and specifically, how you're using that data to identify people who might need some coaching or other development because you're using their data regularly and you have a line of sight to their performance in real time. So what are some of those challenges that you guys have faced along the way, and how have you worked to manage them?
Yeah, great question. So I think first and foremost, the biggest challenge was was the teams. They weren't aware with what were the measures that was pairing them with the right families. So there was a little bit of misunderstanding in how we were going about that. So being transparent and showing them the data points, that it's about the hospital, the race, religion, whether it was going to be on the phone or in person, et cetera, that were the markers that were placed in that, and they were equally measured. There's no AI involved in it right now. That was the first hurdle that we had to jump to really get the team to embrace it. What it's been able to do for us from a coaching standpoint and allow us to recognize those triggers, maybe when someone has a challenge or is needing to be coached up, is looking at, we have in our tier system, just as we're measured from CMS, we also have a tier system with our FRCs, and everyone knows if they're in tier D, meaning that their non-FPA auth is below 25%, it triggers a coaching or a retrain. And so we shared this measure with our teams, and they all see what tier they're in, and what it's allowed is some of those that are in tier A or B, they look to say, oh, I have somebody in tier C or tier D, let me help them out, or vice versa. Those that are maybe in tier C, tier D, or someone in tier B wanting to get to tier A will reach out and lean on each other to try to share and say, what are you doing that's allowing you to be successful in these approaches? So it's given us a level of being transparent. It's definitely come with its challenges, and I've had those one-to-one meetings and group meetings to explain the reasoning and the rationale behind how we're managing this data, but it's really given us an ability to manage our teams up by using some of those things.
That's great. Well, I've got a couple additional questions, and then I want to make sure that we have some time for our audience questions. So if you guys do have questions, make sure that you're putting them into the Q&A area or the chat so that we can get them in front of Steph and Justin. And if you have if you're targeting a specific speaker with your question, just go ahead and let me know, and we can direct it to them accordingly. Steph, I just want to pivot back to you for a couple of minutes, and outside of the goals that we might be trying to achieve in integrating data as part of the talent management practices, or how each individual might respond to kind of using data, evaluating their performance, I think that all kind of rolls up to, a bigger organizational culture issue. And so, a lot of OPOs, I think they think of a support. They have a support first model, and others have a kind of a donation first model where they're prioritizing different things. And so as you shift and you start to potentially leverage this kind of data, it's naturally going to impact the culture of the organization. How do you see that happening for you guys should you decide to go down this path?
Well, I think we're sort of seeing it right now, and we don't have individual performance data. I think at LifeSource, historically, they haven't really shared all data with teams. And so over the last year, we've been sharing everything, how we're doing financially, where we're at with all of our strategic goals. And some team members are like, wow, we've never known that before. And it's kind of scary, or wow, we're doing so much better than we thought we were. This is great, right? Depending on which month and how you're performing. But I think, we're trying to be more transparent with our data so they can better understand how we're all working together towards the same goal. We're not trying to be antagonistic. We're just trying to help support them to do their role better, more efficiently, more effectively by changing process or shifting people around to different hospitals, whatever that might be. But I think, anytime you go into individual performance, people aren't going to be happy. And I think our culture is shifting actually to a positive in that they like seeing the data. Mm-hmm. We always have to constantly remind them, we know it's not just a number. We know it's lives saved. It's amazing, heroic donors who are helping us to do that. And just helping them connect a little more to our mission, to remind them we are all in this together. It really helps. It will help as we go forward. And I do think that those who are not so positive about it, we just have to have those harder conversations to say, why is this affecting you the way that it is? How can we help support you differently? And really try to minimize the impact as much as we possibly can. Again, I go back to a couple of questions before. We're not going to make everyone happy. But we can help them understand a little bit more by giving them a strong, why are we doing this? How is it going to help us as an organization? And how is it going to help them personally in the role that they do? Because even though some of our team members maybe don't look at their individual data, you can't tell me that they don't know how they're performing, because they know. And so we just want them to feel good about how they're performing and know that we support them no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody has some sense of how well they're doing their job, and we may not all have statistics that we can tie to all of our individual jobs in the way that that the coordinators can, or folks who work in call centers where they have average handle time and, objective customer service stats, but we all know if we're doing a good job or not at some level. So I recognize that. And so, Justin, just kind of pivoting back to you for a minute, we're kind of talking about, how you might use this information and being sensitive to how folks may need some coaching because you have ready access to this kind of data. Do you have you had an experience where you've been able to focus on an authorization, on authorization data with an FSC or multiple who have shown considerable improvement, who are achieving their outcomes at higher levels as a result, like a case study, so to speak?
Absolutely. We have had team members, again, once they know what the measure in the mark is, right, that tier D triggers a retrain. But there are other things that we look at when someone drops in the tiers. We use staff members into tier D that later have rebounded back into tier A. The measures go on a rolling 6-month calendar. So it's a rolling 6 month what it's looking at, and it's looking at your non-FP authorization rate. But we've had 2 of our staff that were previously in tier D that have moved into tier D and tier A. And it's allowed us to build a retrain to give them the focus of what were those areas of opportunities on the performance dashboard. Is it phone approaches? Is it with at a certain hospital that they've been approaching that they're not performing well? That maybe we could talk about the dynamics. Is it something at the hospital? Is it the distance travel? And so we're able to break that down, and we're also able to break down. I can tell you when we have 9 or more FRCs on the schedule, we have a 20% higher authorization rate than any other day. So even from a leadership standpoint, my charge to our leadership team is let's make sure we have our staffing appropriately. Let's make sure, again, based on the tier system, we also build our schedule out now to balance the schedule on those that are in tier A, B, C, and D to kind of help to have a really balanced schedule to also set us up for success.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We've got a question that's come in that I think both of you might have the opportunity to address. And Steph, you're kind of talking about, having this, I don't know if it's hypothetical or if it's real, kind of this 50% authorization rate and how people might be at 35 and how do we get them to 50? Like what is your process for as you think about it, because this is potentially something that you might consider in the future. How would you go about setting like what the goals are, either individually or at a team level?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Since we haven't done it before, my thought is really looking at best practice. Also trying to configure, again, what I said before. If we get to 50% authorization rate for every single team member, how many more yeses to donation does that make? And where does that get us in the tiering system? So, everybody can only project where we're at in the tiering system, but how does that help us get to where we need to be? Because if we just pick out an arbitrary number, 50% I just said, if we just pick that out, it might not actually get us to where we need to go. And so really doing and crunching those numbers to making sure that whatever you said, it's going to actually help us get to where we need to be. And then for me, when we talk about operational excellence, we really do talk about continual improvement. So if I'm 35% and we say, hey, we got to get to 60% in order to be tier 1, I'm not going to get to 60% magically. And so from a continual process improvement, we might say, hey, Steph, how about we get to 45% this year because, you ended the year at 35, right? And then trying to get others into that 60%. And for those that are over 60%, they just need to maintain, right? We don't want them to get worse because we have some that are 80% and above. We want them to keep rocking it out. because they're going to help support our other folks who are trying to learn to get better. And it goes to somebody asked about, what if you have newer FSCs and how do you factor them in? You give them some grace to learn their craft. They're not going to learn it in a 3 to 4 month orientation. They're going to learn it by experience and moving forward. But they still have to have good expectation around what you expect somebody who's new in their first year to hit versus somebody who's been 5 years in the role.
Yeah. And Justin, you've kind of talked about this rolling 6-month calendar, and you've got your tier A, B, C, and D. Are those tiers determined in some kind of automated way through the system, or is there some, personal oversight? Like how are you deciding what the levels are that determine the tiers at any given 6-month period?
Yeah, great question. So it is in tier. It's non-FPA auth. It's assigned, it's like greater than 40% is tier A, so on and so forth. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but it goes by the percentage of non-FPA in a rolling 6 month. However, to be enrolled in that, to fall in a tier A, B, C, or D, you have to have 12 or more approaches. So we have a category called tier Z. That is that in the tier Z category, you're going to have the staff that are either contract labor. You're going to have new people that are just off of orientation or in orientation that are in that tier Z. Tier Z, they still get a percentage of what their non-FPA, so we can continue to evaluate where they're falling within that tier Z category. They're just not moved into the other tiers until then. So we can evaluate how their auth rate is going. We can look at what they're doing, but it also allows us to evaluate full-time staff that have been trained and are off orientation to make sure they're not sandbagging it, in a sense that, are they on more FPA approaches or notifications? If they move into tier Z, then I kind of know they're trying to look to protect their authorization. So those are things that kind of happen. We've moved kind of past that staff understand and know and want to be in the tiers so that we don't have that problem that we had in the beginning. But that is how we go about it. And then also within the tiers, tier A, B, C, or D, how you're ranked in that category. If I look at today and see that one person is tier A and they're at the top, and I look at it next week and they're still tier A, but they're third in line, and I know they've had some declines because they're moving down. So you're ranked also in your tier to how that is. So we can evaluate you just to see before. We don't want someone to fall all the way back to tier D before we look at it and say, hey, what's going on? So we can, it calculates that and pulls that as well.
Yeah, interesting. There was a question that came in earlier, Justin, that you responded to in the chat, but I don't know if everybody's reading the chat, so I'm going to just present it to you, and if you can just talk about it for a few minutes, that would be great. So Maria asks if you dispatch staff based on strengths, who is that dispatch decision maker each day as you move staff around your service area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have an authorization coach that's on, and we also have leadership that's part of that. The challenge is number one, we do assignments at 8:30 at night for the following day. But the other challenge is, again, for our large geography, right? We have 100,000 square miles, 175 hospitals. We still have to factor in the person that's the highest as far as matching may not be the person that can go approach that family. It could be because of a language barrier, and that person doesn't speak that language. It also could be geography. That person could be in a different region. So there's still some kind of movement of the chess pieces to still put our best foot forward, but it may not be that person that's in front of that family is the highest. And we look at that in a different way as well. We have a green, yellow, red. Whenever you pull up our referrals, every referral that is the potential for approach for that day that they're on for an assignment, I can look at all the FRCs under that referral to see whether they're green, yellow, red, based on our Family Ready assessment tool to look to see who I want to assign. And we know now that, again, for our performance measures, that as long as we're not assigning someone in the red, if we stay under 30% of assigning someone that's highlighted red for that approach, we meet our targets. The implementation of all of these tools and that has allowed us to see 40 donors a month. Prior, we would hit a 40 donor month here and there. We've hit 40 donors consecutively over 3 months after implementation and kind of fine tuning this. So it does work. It's been valuable for us, but there's no exact science. You're not always going to have the best person in front of that family, but it has really charged the team to want to move up and to accept those challenges.
Thank you. Hopefully that answers your question, Maria. There's one other that you may have seen from Dominic. And I think Steph started to respond to this earlier. And so if you want to weigh in, Justin, you can. So it's how would you factor in newer FSCs in the overall deployment strategy, as they may not have enough cases to identify or show the case circumstances they best pair with?
Absolutely. So typically those that are in the higher tiers is who those newer FRCs are paired with. So we have the tier Z category that we place them in and track once they're off orientation. We know they're going to be in that bucket. And that's where we kind of look again. We still look at what their percentage of non-FPA is versus the tiers, but they stay in that tier Z category also to allow them to get those approaches, get in front of those families, but also not feel that pressure that they're going to be, penalized, if you will, for lack of a better word, and, put on a retrain in that. They still need ample time to grow and fulfill in the tiers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Steph, I just want to pivot back to you for a minute or two. And, one of the things that we've been questioning a lot is, when OPOs aren't using authorization data as part of that performance evaluation process for an FSC, for a coordinator, whatever the acronym is that you guys use locally for your staff. How are you measuring their performance? When it comes time for an annual review or a mid-cycle review, if you're not using authorization data, as you guys are today, what are the things that go into determining how well somebody's doing their job?
It's a really great question. I would say that we're getting better at this, but really overarching goals. So the global strategic metrics, if we're meeting them or not, is part of that. So for our, we call them donation liaisons. And, there's this non-FPA 40%, which I said earlier, we're about 33 right now. So that would be part of it. And then really oh, Anthony, it looks like you're having feedback with your mic, maybe. Is that better? Yes, better. Okay. And then we, like most folks, you bring in your values and how they're best supporting the mission as a human. But I think that's why it's essential when we get into talking about how we infuse performance metrics and how we get it to individualized folks. We have to be very thoughtful about how we do that. So that everybody sits at the same level. It's not just our donation liaison team that's getting goals. It's the whole organization getting goals, so that not any one role is the one who's having to hit those performance metrics. It's everybody, because it's really essential. I think we all realize this, that we need our teams to understand how what they do on a daily basis affects our strategy, and giving them those performance goals to meet or not meet helps them to understand how what they do every day helps us to be a better OPO and get us to our mission of saving more lives. I don't think there's a secret sauce, but I know I'm going to probably hit Justin up at another date to try to understand his steering system a little more. It's really interesting, kind of how he's going about it. I haven't heard that yet. So I've learned a lot today. I've taken a ton of notes and can't wait to have a different conversation.
Great, thanks. And I'm sorry about the feedback on my mic. Hopefully it's not there now. I'm not sure what may have been causing that. So I do apologize if that was a distraction. We've got a few minutes left. So if you do have additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I do want to ask Justin, you've had an opportunity to listen to and probably be in the position of many OPOs who are still maybe reluctant to adopting the use of authorization data as part of real talent management, decision making, and practices. So, what advice would you give to those folks who may be hesitant on how to really kind of rethink about the benefits of using data more so than like maybe the risks or the challenges that they might see from it?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think I've had the privilege of working in 3 different OPOs, and I will tell you, approaching families and meeting the communities where they we're all different in all 3 areas. So my advice is to say, as data and those type of things can be a huge help, you really have to assess your team and really understand what is that makeup of that team and what makes them tick. When we started this, we started slow. We really started looking at how can we impact overall, right, to get more lives saved. But it's been a delicate balance of a give and take. So I think while using authorization data and knowing that really at the core of people, everybody wants to be better, right? And you have to have a measure. I think how you do that and how you approach it, I think is dependent on not only your leadership, but the team that you have and what can they take on. Because the last thing that you want is family care teams feeling scared about their authorization or walking into a room to meet a family where they are with baggage. You want that noise to be very limited. So, I'm happy to, talk and share offline any challenges and be totally transparent about some of the things that's come about. But I think it's about really embracing it. I think showing and sharing and being transparent about people's authorization rates is always the right way to go because lives depend on it. But how you go about it, I think, is really what I would challenge any of you to make sure that you make it fit your culture.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come in. So we're going to wrap just a couple minutes early. I want to thank you both for the time that you spent with everyone today and all of the information that you shared. It was very insightful and very thought-provoking. And so hopefully people who took the time to attend got the answers that they were looking for from you both. And we can make the session available if you have other team members who weren't able to attend today. So reach out if that's something that you'd be interested in. Also, please keep in mind that just like every session, we do send out a survey at the end. It just takes a couple of minutes, and it's really where we get the ideas for the kinds of content that you guys are interested in as an audience. So if you don't mind, please just spend 2 minutes providing us with some feedback about today's session and your ideas for future content. So again, Steph and Justin, thank you so much for your time today. We really do appreciate it. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.